Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Small Changes Big Impact series. This series comprises 11 monthly podcast episodes with the aim of creating awareness on short-lived climate pollutants. Short-lived climate pollutants not only affects the global climate, but causes serious problems of air pollution in African countries and affects you in your daily life. At Hali Hewa, we are proud to bring you a platform where you can listen from African experts. And today we are proud to have Dr. Hali Kaudia on set. Welcome.
Thank you, Abigail.
So I will read your bio, which is quite remarkable. Dr. Hali Kaudia served as Kenya's first Environment Secretary between 2008 and September 2018 and is now the Senior Africa Advisor at the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. In a career spanning over 3 decades, she has worked for various international non-governmental organizations, government ministries, and in the private sector with a focus on bridging the gaps between science, policy, and practice in the environmental sector. She has also served as on international boards and worked in intergovernmental partnerships and networks, including as co-chair of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, among many others. Personally, your work is very inspirational, and I believe it's the same case for many of us who are in the environmental field. And yeah, your career is quite remarkable, and I just wanted to know whether you've always wanted to do this kind of work and what drives you to do it.
Abigail, thank you so much for inviting me to this episode of Small Changes, Big Impact. Yes, I've always wanted to work in the area of environment and conservation of the environment because I love nature, and I was brought up in a village where I interacted with nature at a very young stage, and that helped me in being very positive about nature conservation.
Oh, amazing. When we were conversing outside, you talked about how Nairobi has changed a lot. Initially, this place was more of a forest. Would you say that has changed a lot?
I think Nairobi has changed tremendously, and I went to Nairobi University, so I could see Nairobi. That was then called the Green City in the Sun, and we had trees, the forests, and as I was explaining to you, in June, July, you would find that it is so cold and it is misty. You would find mists, but now we don't see that anymore.
Yeah. And I think we can all attest to the changes that are already happening. And so in our previous episode, we introduced our audience to what short-lived climate pollutants are and the Africa SLCP project in general. But from the interaction on social media and also amongst our friends, everyone is surprised. I mean, they've never heard of anything called short-lived climate pollutants, but we also just listed them as, methane, hydrofluorocarbons, the black carbon, as well as, I think I'm forgetting the other one, tropospheric ozone.
Yeah.
So we want you to help us understand and our audience understand what these things are and how are they affecting us in our day-to-day lives.
Thank you very much. I think rightfully, as you said, the short-lived climate pollutants affect us in our day-to-day lives. And I find it easier to understand them from the point of view of their sources. Where do they come from? Yeah, these are gases and air pollutants, small particles, dust that affect our climate system. And as you're aware, changes in climate change, the change in climate has affected us in terms of our inability to produce sufficient foods because of disasters associated with droughts, floods, mudslides, and so on. And the change in the climatic patterns has made it very difficult for even farmers to plan when they plant and when they can prepare their fields. And these short-lived climate pollutants are the gases which you have mentioned, methane, carbon, nitrogen dioxide, and so on. The only difference between them and what are classified as greenhouse gases is that they have a shorter lifespan in the air, weeks, days, years, compared to carbon dioxide, which is the main driver of climate change, which can be in our space for 300 to even 1,000 years. So that's why they are defined as short-lived. They are short-lived, but they have got a higher impact on our climate system. Yes.
Oh, And if we go deeply into the sources, would you say, how would you say, as Dr. Alice Kaudia, do you encounter, for example, black carbon or methane in your day-to-day life?
I think we need to simplify these languages of black carbon and methane and so on, okay? And the sources are just from our own actions as human beings, what we do to produce and consume the things we need to support our life, to support our planet, is what generates these gases. I'll give you a very simple example on our everyday life. In Africa, over 70% of our households still depend on wood fuel as the primary source of cooking energy. And then we still burn this fuel on our ordinary 3-stone fire stoves or cook stoves, which are not very efficient and also generate heat that is, polluting, a lot of smoke. So when we talk of black carbon, it is just soot. And where do we get soot? We get soot when we light our cook stoves. We get soot when our vehicles don't have proper engines and blow a lot of dark smoke, which we see. In that dark smoke, we have got these polluting gases. Yes.
And with the work that you do at the moment with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, among many others, are there specific policies that are directed to reducing these pollutants?
I like that question about what are the specific policies to reduce the emission of these gases.
Yeah.
Allow me to share with you a recent study which we did through the Climate and Clean Air Coalition in partnership with the African Union Commission, the Stockholm Environment Institute, and the UNEP Regional Office for Africa. We undertook what we defined as an integrated assessment of air pollution and climate change and linked it to sustainable development and linked it to the vision that Africa has in Agenda 2063. And we examined what would happen in terms of these emissions if we have our business as usual, that is, we conduct our business without caring whether we are emitting or not. Yeah. Then we looked at what would happen if we control the emission of short-lived climate pollutants. And then we looked at what then do we need to do to control these gases so that they don't impact our climate system and our production and consumption system, so that we attain the vision of Agenda 2063 of the Africa we want. And we worked on 5 sectors which really affect, whose management affect our climate system. That is how we manage our waste, how we produce our energy and consume our energy, our agricultural production practices, our transport system, and how this affects our health. See that? And we found that, take it, Abigail, a human being that is healthy is a productive human being. So anything that will affect our health will definitely affect our social and economic development because we won't be productive. So when we looked at these sectors with respect to how that affects our health, we found that, yes, if we don't do anything to control these short-lived climate pollutants, then let's say by 2063, we'll be losing 1.6 million people prematurely out of air pollution. So what policies are there? Let me take the example on the energy sector, and particularly the energy consumption in households, because I think that affects many of us, especially women, children, the elderly, in our rural areas who still depend on solid fuels as the primary source of energy for cooking. Yeah. So one of the policy directions that could be encouraged is to ensure that we move to energy efficiency. We promote renewable sources of fuel for us. Can we have every household use LPG gas, which is less polluting? Or can we move to the more advanced cooking systems, for example, induction cook stoves? So electricity should be as cheap as possible, and it should not just be cheap. It should be, yes, affordable and available. So transitioning to renewable energy and ensuring that clean energy is available, accessible, affordable at all times is very important, so that I would call the bottom of the pyramid population can transition to cleaner cooking solutions. The other thing is transport. Transport is an area where we could have very sound policies, and many African countries are already moving there, whereby we are moving to electric transport systems. The other bit which we do every day, and I think really we need to emphasize this, is to control open burning of waste from all sectors: agriculture sector, municipal waste, plastics. We should not burn them openly. We should improve our waste management system and also move towards policies of zero waste generation. Yeah.
I mean, you've touched on energy issues, and I'm glad you talked about the affordability aspect, because I mean, as Kenyans right now, a lot of people are struggling to afford the LPG gases in household level. Then you've also touched on transport, and I think for most of the cyclists here in Nairobi, or people who try to use other means of transport, they do struggle because it's clear that the infrastructure is not set up for them to, for non-motorists to be able to move within town efficiently. And then thirdly, you've spoken about, what was the last thing you said? Those transport, energy, and...
Waste.
Oh, yes, and waste management. So you've been in this space for quite a long time.
Yes.
And so the question that I'm asking myself right now is, what are these barriers that are not allowing us to get to that level where, we can provide affordable and efficient energy systems for people? Or, why isn't the transport system improving since time immemorial? I mean, in general, what would you say are some of these barriers that really hinder us from getting to the place that we want to be?
Okay, thank you for asking about the barriers that are hindering us to transition to better resource production and consumption, so that we eliminate the emission of these harmful gases into the air, and therefore also manage the impact on our health and our natural capital resources. The barriers are they are general barriers, but they're also sector-specific barriers.
Yeah.
But overall, I can see 3 barriers. Number one is our ability to implement the good policies that we formulate. I think Africa is not short of good policies to enable us transition to climate-friendly consumption and production systems. But we formulate these good policies, come up with very good regulations, even air quality regulations, but then we don't go into implementation because of limited finance and limited technology and limited knowledge. I always make a laugh because, when you talk about Africa, there'll be always the aspect of capacity building. But we are always building capacity. Yeah. So what is stopping us from using this capacity that we have built? We have brilliant African people, but if we don't have the necessary finance and technology to move on, to transition, to change our way of producing and using resources, then we are not able to really make a progress. Yeah. So the hindrance is policy, as I said, one. The other thing is limited awareness. Just limited awareness, especially among the population that should be informed most, the end users. And when I talk of the end users, it should not be confused as to the rural people, because there's that underlying assumption. Sometimes when you talk of end users, our brains go to, those are the rural people and the people who don't understand these things. No, I mean, even the end users of knowledge and technology or information from research and policy that can make us change. I always say that our universities need to have a strong link with industries. For example, in the area of air pollution, if we have to create awareness that we are polluting air, we need to generate technologies that can help us control these, then the researchers should have a strong partnership with end users of that research knowledge, the industry, and the actual general population, so that they're able to take this information, apply it, and change the way we use our resources to move on to climate resilient and low emission production and consumption practices.
Yeah. And you also talked about the intersection of health. And there's a report I went through by the Institute of Governance and Sustainable Development that states reducing short-lived climate pollutants provides strong benefits for public health and can save up to 4.7 million lives each year. And I try my best to explain these short-lived climate pollutants from an aspect of air pollution, and you've also touched about how women and children are more vulnerable, like you said, to the health impacts of this exposure to the pollutants. And would you say there are specific or any particular pollutants that are driving this health crisis, and what specifically are they doing to people?
Okay. I think for Africa, and I want to emphasize this again, the specific short-lived climate pollutants that are really driving negative impact is black carbon or soot.
Yeah.
Simply because for indoor, in our African setup system, the architecture of our houses and of the kitchens don't allow good airflow. And therefore, there's a buildup every time someone is cooking.
Yeah.
Remember also, we are in this part of the world where even for lighting, we still have the wick candles, the wick lamps, which also emit soot. So managing black carbon is very, very important. The other one is methane. You see, we are quite a continent where management of waste is still very, very poor. And those stockpiles of waste rot. When they rot, these gases are emitted. Methane is emitted. Similarly, when we have our livestock, the cow dung, also, and also when the livestock are belching, sometimes, the livestock belch.
Yeah,
and when they belch, they also emit these gases. So we need to look at livestock nutrition, look at the feedstock that we give to our livestock so that they belch less. We need to look at how can we manage manure, maybe convert it to biogas, which give us cleaner energy. And then the slurry that comes out of that biogas is very good manure for crops. So you see, you will interface again renewable energy and food production, which is two key areas which are very important for us in Africa. We need healthy people, we need food, and we need to have renewable resources in our system.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll take you back to something you talked about, which is Agenda 2063.
Right.
I'm sure someone is wondering, what is that?
Pardon?
I'm sure someone is wondering, what is Agenda 2063?
Oh, yeah. Agenda 2063, which I referred to, is actually a continental commitment by the African Union with an aspiration of seeing a better Africa. An Africa that is industrialized, an Africa that is creating wealth for her people, an Africa where people are living in an environment which is clean, safe, and secure. All these things we are talking about, air pollution, have been minimized. It is a true dream of an ecosystem that supports human life and supports nature conservation so that we have a balance in terms of how we produce and consume between generations. We should all enjoy what has been given to us by nature.
True.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is pursued by all African countries under the African Union. So it's a framework policy that is enabling Africa to move in a sustainable development pathway. Yes.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up, I'm sure someone is listening and wondering, what are some of the personal steps I can take towards, reducing my own emissions, which, as you've explained, helps to solve a lot of challenges in the health sector, as well as, the global climate, bringing more stability to it. So what would you say are, very briefly, very high level, what are some of the things that we can do at a personal level to reduce our emissions?
I think, first of all, I like the theme of this episode. Is it small
changes,
big impact.
Yeah.
Now, we can get small changes big impact when we take action at individual level. And by individual, I just don't mean within your household. Individual means if you're an industrialist and you want to invest in a big multi-billion industry, what are the small designs and construction technologies that you can apply so that your building, your industry will not pollute the environment?
Yeah.
Now, these 5 areas which I mentioned, waste management, transport, energy production and consumption, agriculture, and indoor house residential energy use. They are all aspects where when we take action in a small way, we can bring a big change.
True.
Take transport. If you can pool your transport, that in an area you are leaving 5 people going in one direction, you say, let's just use one vehicle. That will help.
Yeah.
Okay? If you can move from point A to point B cycling, walking, that's better. You will emit less. When we come to the household energy situation, we can look at, one can adopt a system whereby in your cooking practices, you cook. There's a stove which I've been promoting called fireless cooker. You can boil your stuff in the main gas cooker, and once it reaches the boiling point, you take the rest of the cooking time by putting it in that fireless cooker, and you'll have saved some energy, you see, and you'll have emitted less.
Yeah.
You know, so a lot of it requires that we examine our own personal spheres of production and consumption and take steps to ensure that any activity we are engaging in minimizes the generation of waste, minimizes the emission of the short-lived climate pollutants and all other types of gases, and even dust. You know, if we can be sure that whatever we are doing reduces the generation of dust, let's say in the forest sector, when you are sawmilling, can we ensure that there's less dust coming out so that you pollute less? So a lot of it boils all. What we are saying is that to manage air pollution and to manage climate change and to improve human health and ensure we are a productive population, we need to minimize the generation of waste. We need to minimize the emission of these short-lived climate pollutants. For Africa, let us get rid of black carbon. Let us get rid of methane. Let us minimize the particulate matter, small particles that really affect our system. Because once we breathe in, we are affected. You know, they say a human life system is an ABC system. It is the air you breathe, the blood you have that circulates that air, and the sea is the circulation system that you have. I mean, if you can't breathe, you're gone.
Yeah.
If you don't have a good circulation system, you're gone. But you must have quality air, and that's why managing the emission of these short-lived climate pollutants and all types of pollutants is very, very important. Yeah.
No, thank you so much. I can't even add any more because you've quite highlighted everything in summary. And what I'm learning from this conversation is that basically everyone has a responsibility. Everyone has a part to play. And it can't be only us who are in this space that should care, because at the end of the day, small changes within your household at a personal level will eventually bring something big. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us in your very busy schedule, and we really do appreciate the time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
James, you shared.
Making a contribution to reduction of short-lived climate pollutants, particularly in Africa and globally.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this is only the beginning. We hope by the time we're finishing a series of 11 episodes, people will be more aware of what these things are, and it will be more clearer the specific steps they can take towards reducing their emissions and reducing short-lived climate pollutants. So thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye.